Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
The day my world cracked wide open started like any other ordinary Tuesday, with the kind of morning that never hints at how hard it's about to punch you in the gut. I was 19, halfway through my second semester at community college, and still clinging to the illusion that life could be predictable if you worked hard and followed the rules. I remember sitting in my sociology class, nodding along while the professor droned on about structural inequalities, when my phone started vibrating in my pocket like it knew something I didn't. 3 missed calls from an unknown number, one from the local sheriff's department, and a single voicemail that changed the trajectory of my life in a way I'm still unpacking all these years later. There's no good way to be told your parents are gone, no gentle phrasing that softens the blow when someone says, "There was an accident," followed by words like, "instant," "no survivors," and "we're sorry for your loss." I didn't cry right away, shocked does that to you. It keeps your body running like a machine while your soul is still somewhere in a free fall. I don't remember how I got home that day, or how I managed to make funeral arrangements when my hands were trembling so badly I couldn't even sign my own name without tracing over the lines twice. What I do remember, what I will never forget, is the way Aunt Karen swooped in like some well-practiced angel, with perfume that smelled expensive and eyes that scanned the room like she was already calculating what she could strip away. She wrapped her arms around me so tightly I thought she might snap my ribs, whispering those practiced condolences, all soft tones and carefully measured grief. "Sweetheart, I'll take care of everything," she said, her voice coated in concern. "You just focus on grieving, okay?" At 19, you still want to believe the adults in the room will do the right thing. You still think that family means something more than shared blood and awkward holiday dinners. So when Karen said she'd handle the estate, I didn't think twice. She was my mother's older sister, after all, and she'd always had this polished, composed air that made you feel like she knew what she was doing, even when she didn't. She moved fast. Too fast. Before the dirt had settled on my parents' graves, she'd already filed papers to become executor of their estate, claiming it was in everyone's best interest until I could get back on my feet. I signed whatever she handed me. I was grieving, numb, and stupid, too overwhelmed to question the fine print or notice the way she always made sure the meetings were held when I was too drained to think straight. Within a month, the family home was sold to a couple from Ohio, every stick of furniture either auctioned or donated, and the life my parents built over 30 years was reduced to one cardboard box she handed me like it was a consolation prize. "It's just stuff," she said, smiling as she patted my hand. "You're young. You'll earn it back." That line, it drilled itself into my bones. Not just because of the arrogance, but because of the way she said it, like my parents' life savings, retirement accounts, stocks, and insurance policies were just bonus money she could skim from without a second thought. I didn't realize until months later that she'd transferred everything, every last cent, into her own name. She claimed it was temporary, said it was to protect the assets, said there were tax issues I wouldn't understand. But by then, the damage was done. And when I finally pushed back, tried to ask questions, she got that tight little smile she always wore when she thought she was being clever and said, "Oh honey, don't be dramatic. What would you even do with that money at your age? Blow it on clothes and parties? Be grateful you have a roof over your head." I didn't even have that. I ended up sleeping in my car for a while, too proud to beg her for anything, too angry to admit I'd been duped. She moved into a new house around the same time, a massive place on the edge of town with a wraparound porch and granite countertops, bought in cash. I knew because I saw the deed filed under her name. She hosted garden parties, wore new jewelry, and acted like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, I worked double shifts and ate peanut butter sandwiches in parking lots, watching my life disappear piece by piece. I didn't have a plan back then, not yet. But I made a promise to myself while sitting in that freezing car with my coat wrapped tight around my knees and a single blanket between me and the night air. I promised I'd never forget. And I sure as hell wouldn't forgive. She thought she'd stolen my future. She had no idea I was just getting started. There's a kind of silence that settles into your life when you're broke, exhausted, and clinging to your dignity by a thread that feels thinner every morning. That kind of silence doesn't just fill the room, it seeps into your bones, into the spaces between your thoughts, until even your dreams start to sound like empty echoes of what could have been. That's where I lived for the next few years, somewhere between silence and survival, scraping together whatever I could find while pretending I wasn't constantly one misstep away from falling completely off the edge. College didn't feel like a future anymore. It felt like a placeholder, something to keep me from admitting how much I'd lost and how little I had left to stand on. I kept going to classes, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. I juggled part-time work like some desperate circus act, weeknights at a gas station off the freeway, weekend shifts cleaning motel rooms that smelled like cigarette smoke and broken promises, and a brief, humiliating stint handing out samples in a grocery store where I had to wear a fake smile and a polyester apron that made my skin itch. Most nights, I barely had enough energy to keep my eyes open while writing papers, and some days I skipped meals just to make rent on the tiny one-bedroom apartment I shared with peeling paint, a leaky faucet, and cockroaches that were somehow braver than I was. Meanwhile, Karen was out there living her best goddamn life, at least on the surface. She moved into that shiny new house with white shutters and flower beds planted by landscapers she never bothered to tip. She hosted dinners where the wine cost more than my monthly grocery bill, went on shopping sprees, posted vacation photos from places I couldn't even pronounce, and smiled like she'd earned every piece of it. I saw her once in town, stepping out of a boutique with 2 bags in each hand and sunglasses so oversized they looked like a disguise. She didn't see me. I ducked behind a parked car before she could, but even from a distance, I could feel the smugness rolling off her in waves. She didn't look guilty. She looked satisfied. And maybe that's what made it worse. Not just that she'd taken everything, but that she'd done it so shamelessly, with the kind of arrogance only someone who never expects consequences can wear so easily. She walked around like she was untouchable, like I was just some unfortunate footnote in her little fairy tale life. And I stayed quiet. I kept my head down. I let her believe I'd disappeared into nothing. But I hadn't. Not completely. In between shifts and study sessions, I started teaching myself to code, really code, not just the intro classes they offered at school. I borrowed textbooks from the library, watched tutorials on a cracked secondhand laptop, and spent entire weekends buried in lines of syntax that made my eyes blur and my fingers ache. At first, it was just a way to feel useful, to keep my brain from rusting. But soon it turned into something more, something sharp, something that gave me control in a world where everything else had been ripped from my hands. I started building small programs, simple tools, tiny applications that I could sell for pocket change on freelance platforms. The money wasn't much at first, a few dollars here and there, but it was mine. It was earned. And it was honest. I learned how to write proposals, how to market myself without giving away my desperation, how to charge more without apologizing for it. I studied business strategies late into the night, scribbling ideas in cheap notebooks while eating instant noodles straight from the pot, sometimes too tired to even bother washing the dishes afterward. There's something oddly empowering about building something from the ground up while the rest of the world thinks you're already buried. Every hour I spent learning, every error I debugged, every rejected proposal I rewrote until it finally landed, those things became bricks in the foundation I was laying beneath my feet. I didn't have an inheritance or a trust fund or a safety net, but I had my guts, my stubbornness, and a fire inside me that burned hotter every time I thought about the look on Karen's face when she said, "You're young, you'll earn it back." You ever had family stab you in the back and then smile like it meant nothing? Did you let it go, or did you sit in that pain, let it simmer, and plan the kind of payback that doesn't need shouting, just timing? Tell me in the comments, because I still wonder how many of us were told to be grateful while watching someone else walk away with what was rightfully ours. It was a rainy Tuesday when it finally happened, a cold, miserable kind of day that mirrored the way my bones always felt back then. I opened my email, expecting another rejection, another lowball offer, another request for free revisions. But there it was instead, A message from a mid-sized design firm asking if I was available for a 6-month back-end integration project. It wasn't just any gig. It was my first real client, my first serious paycheck, my first chance to step out of the damn shadows. I sat there in stunned silence, rereading the message again and again like maybe it would vanish if I blinked too hard. But it didn't vanish. And neither would I. There's a certain kind of satisfaction that doesn't come with applause or praise or even a pat on the back. It comes in silence, in knowing you're rising while the ones who bet against you still think you're crawling. I didn't make noise when I started building my career, didn't post shiny milestones online or pose in front of company logos like some startup influencer desperate for clout. I stayed low, quiet, deliberate, because that's how you win when no one sees you coming. That's how you take your power back, piece by piece, without giving the people who underestimated you the chance to steal it again. That first client changed everything. Not just because of the paycheck, though I won't lie. Seeing a 4-figure deposit hit my account after years of scrubbing motel bathrooms and counting quarters at gas stations felt like a goddamn miracle. But because it was the first time someone saw value in me without needing to know my last name, my past, or what I'd lost. They didn't care about my story. They just wanted the work done, and I delivered. I over-delivered. I finished ahead of schedule, streamlined their entire infrastructure, and turned that one project into 3 more with referrals alone. Word spread fast, not through headlines or social media, but through back-channel recommendations and quiet industry whispers, the best kind of reputation, the kind you don't have to advertise. I kept things simple, lean, and anonymous. My name was on contracts but not on websites. I used a business alias, set up a shell company, and operated with precision. I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted freedom, control, the kind of security you build when you've been burned so badly you don't ever want to owe anyone a damn thing again. I saved every dollar, invested smart, bought a modest but strategic piece of real estate through a holding company registered out of state. Nothing flashy, nothing that could be traced easily. I renovated the place slowly, turned it into my headquarters, a private workspace with high-speed servers and soundproof rooms where I could focus without distraction. And the best part? It was only 3 blocks away from Karen's house. She had no idea, of course. She still thought I was probably flipping burgers somewhere or still sleeping on someone's couch in a different state, maybe working retail and finding myself. Whatever the hell that means to people who've never had to scrape together rent money by digging for coins and couch cushions. She kept living like nothing could ever touch her, same luxury car, same designer bags, same fake smile stretched over her perfect teeth while she mingled at wine tastings and business luncheons. I'd pass her sometimes in town, still unnoticed, still invisible in her world. And every time, I'd smile to myself and think, the girl you thought would fail is watching you now, and you don't even know it. I didn't need to be seen to be powerful. I was building quietly, stacking success like bricks behind walls no one could see through. I hired a small team, trained them personally, taught them to move like ghosts in the industry. No loud branding, just quality work, solid delivery, consistent results. My client list grew, my portfolio expanded, and the money followed. I started investing in other ventures, real estate, e-commerce, a software startup still in beta testing, but already attracting attention. I made friends in places that mattered, bankers, lawyers, developers, analysts. None of them knew my history, just my work ethic. That was all I ever wanted, to be known for what I built, not for what was stolen from me. And then, like clockwork, the cracks in Karen's perfect world started showing. It started subtly, the way financial ruin always does in rich people's lives: missed payments disguised as administrative delays, quiet layoffs labeled as restructuring, and fewer social media updates showing off beach vacations or extravagant dinners. I heard whispers during a business auction one afternoon, just casual background noise while I browsed a list of commercial properties being liquidated from a failed interior design firm. 2 men behind me, both dressed in the same kind of bland corporate suits you could smell a mile away, were talking about someone in town struggling with credit issues. One of them said her name like it was a punchline: Karen Whitmore. I didn't turn around. I just stood there with the property brochure in my hand, heart pounding in the slow, steady rhythm that felt colder than satisfaction, heavier than revenge. I listened as they talked about how her name had shown up on a list of personal guarantees from a crumbling investment group, how she was rumored to be offloading assets, how the bank was circling. And still, I didn't smile, not because I wasn't glad to hear it, but because it felt like the beginning of something bigger. Something was finally shifting. The empire she built on stolen ground was starting to sink. And I didn't have to lift a finger, because gravity does the work eventually. There's something unsettling about watching a woman who once stood so tall start to unravel at the seams, her carefully curated world collapsing piece by piece until all that's left is a fragile, trembling shell of the person who once believed nothing could touch her. The fall never happens all at once. It comes in waves, slow and cruel, a series of small humiliations that chip away at pride until even denial can't hold the pieces together. That's exactly what happened to Karen, the woman who used to sip her wine like royalty and sneer down at people who didn't speak in investment terms or wear designer shoes to the grocery store. But money has a funny way of showing you what's real when it disappears, and when Karen's luck finally ran out, she didn't just lose her lifestyle, she lost the version of herself that had only ever existed on borrowed power. It started with rumors I pretended not to listen to, whispers about a real estate deal gone sideways, a boutique investment partnership she'd joined with her second husband that turned out to be nothing more than smoke and mirrors wrapped in fake contracts and inflated promises. Gary, her perfectly tanned, vaguely smug husband, vanished from town before the dust even settled. Word was he'd run off with some 28-year-old Pilates instructor from the country club and taken whatever money was left in their joint account. Karen, for all her pride and posturing, hadn't seen it coming. She'd backed his ventures, signed her name on his loans, let him play businessman with the same blind arrogance she once used to dismiss my questions about my parents' estate. But karma doesn't send warnings, it just shows up and takes everything. The house was the first to go. Repossessed. Foreclosure notices slapped on the front door like scarlet letters while the neighbors whispered behind trimmed hedges and closed their blinds when she passed by. Her car followed soon after, towed in the middle of the night, leaving her stranded in a driveway that no longer belonged to her. And just like that, the queen was dethroned, evicted, abandoned, and chewed up by the same system she once thought she controlled. It wasn't long after that when she came to find me. I heard the knock before I saw her. It was hesitant at first, then louder, more urgent, like someone trying to summon a lifeline they weren't sure would answer. I knew it was her before I even looked through the peephole. Something in the air told me. Maybe it was the way everything had been building toward this moment, or maybe it was just intuition sharpened by years of quiet rage and restraint. I opened the door slowly, and there she was, my aunt, the woman who stole my future with a smile and a condescending pat on the hand, now standing on my doorstep like a ghost with nowhere left to haunt. She looked awful. Not just disheveled, but hollow. Her hair was pulled back in a sloppy ponytail, her eyes sunken, makeup streaked and barely holding. She wore an old coat I hadn't seen since I was a teenager, clinging to it like armor against a world that had finally turned on her. She didn't speak right away. Just stood there, mouth trembling, eyes scanning my face like she couldn't believe I was real, or maybe she just couldn't believe I was the one who'd opened the door. Finally, her voice cracked. "Rachel," she said, barely a whisper. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't say a word. I didn't step aside. I just stood there, my expression blank, letting her words hang in the air like a weight she'd finally been forced to carry. She started crying then, not delicate, dainty tears like she probably expected to work on me, but the full, guttural kind that come from realizing you're no longer the one in control. Her knees buckled slightly, and she reached out, as if the gesture alone could rewind everything, undo every lie, every theft, every smug comment that once made me feel small. "You have everything now," she said between sobs, voice shrill and breaking. "You don't need to punish me. Please, help me." And in that moment, standing there on the threshold of the home she never knew I owned, I realized just how deeply I'd changed. I wasn't the girl she'd robbed anymore. I was the woman she never saw coming. I looked at her, Not with anger or satisfaction, but with something far more unsettling, indifference. I stepped aside slowly, gestured toward the hallway with an almost clinical calm, and said, "I'll help you." But not the way you think. Her face flickered confusion, fear, and maybe a tiny spark of hope. But she had no idea what those words would mean. And that was exactly how I wanted it. There's a difference between forgiveness and mercy, but sometimes the lines between them get so damn blurry, you start to wonder if you ever really knew which was which in the first place. When I told Karen I would help her, I meant it, but not in the way she wanted. Not in the way people like her expect when they fall from grace and start clawing at anything that resembles a soft landing. She thought I was offering salvation, maybe even redemption, but I was only offering consequence. I gave her a room, yes, a small, windowless guest room at the back of the house with a creaky bed and a single set of linens that hadn't been touched in years. I didn't throw her onto the street, didn't scream, didn't seek dramatic revenge like some movie villain with a monologue. I just gave her what she'd never given me, a place to survive and a price to pay for it. The first morning, I handed her a list. It was typed, clean, precise, laundry, floors, bathrooms, kitchen, trash bins, windows. She stared at it like it was written in another language, blinking slowly, the paper shaking slightly in her hand. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just looked her in the eye and said, "Breakfast is at 7. You'll find the supplies in the closet." And just like that, the roles reversed. Karen, who once sat at the head of long mahogany dinner tables and bragged about her housekeeper's attention to detail, was now scrubbing my tile grout on her knees with a toothbrush and a bottle of vinegar. She ironed my clothes, washed my sheets, mopped the floors until her back ached, and folded towels with the kind of care she used to expect from people she couldn't be bothered to look in the eye. She never protested, not outright at least. But her silence was loud, the kind of silence that seeps into every corner of a room and lingers long after the mop water dries. I never raised my voice, never made a scene. I was kind, polite even. I thanked her when tasks were completed, offered her plain meals, gave her clean clothes. But I never let her forget where she stood now. And I didn't need to. The work itself stripped her down, peeled back her pride layer by layer until there was nothing left but the raw, bitter truth she'd spent her whole life dressing in silk and diamonds to avoid. Marcus came by one evening and watched her quietly as she swept the living room floor, her movements slow and mechanical like she was afraid that if she stopped for too long, her mind might collapse into the silence. He pulled me aside afterward, his face twisted in something between disbelief and discomfort, and said, "What are you doing, Rachel? Is this justice or cruelty?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked past him, toward the hallway where Karen had disappeared, and finally said, "I don't think I know the difference anymore." Because that's the thing about bitterness. It doesn't explode like rage, it erodes like water, slowly reshaping you into something colder, harder, and less recognizable every day. I didn't hate her, not exactly. But I couldn't look at her without remembering that cardboard box she handed me after my parents died, the one filled with a few photos and a necklace while she kept everything else that should have been mine. So I watched her scrub the floors she used to walk on in heels, and I let her keep her dignity one task at a time, until there was nothing left but the work. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. I heard her footsteps stop abruptly in the hallway, followed by a low gasp, soft, startled, like she'd seen a ghost. I stepped out from my office and saw her standing there, hunched over the old wooden storage chest I hadn't touched in years. It was cracked open, the top layer revealing a dusty leather-bound photo album she must have found while organizing shelves. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, photos of my parents, my childhood, birthdays, holidays, memories she had once pretended to care about. And then she found it, a single folded note tucked behind the back cover, pressed between pages like a forgotten truth waiting to be uncovered. It was my mother's handwriting, unmistakable, still neat despite the years. Karen read it silently, her lips moving just enough for me to recognize her eyes scanning every word. Whatever it said hit her like a slap across the soul. Her face changed in a way I hadn't seen before, not even when she first showed up on my doorstep. Her shoulders sagged deeper, her mouth opened like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. She clutched the album to her chest like it might anchor her to something real, and for the first time since she arrived, I saw something close to real pain flash across her face, not from the labor, not from the loss of her empire, but from something deeper, something older. She turned toward me, tears pooling in her eyes, and I could tell she wanted to ask me something. But I didn't speak. I just stared back, waiting to see what came next. And whatever she'd just read in that note, I knew it was only the beginning of the unraveling. Because sometimes revenge is quiet. Sometimes it's hidden in a box you never meant to open. And sometimes it's written in your mother's handwriting. I woke up to silence that morning, but not the kind of quiet you get used to in a house still heavy with sleep, the kind of silence that hums with absence, thick and deliberate, like something had been erased from the air itself. The guest room door was open, the sheets on the bed half pulled back, the pillows still indented from where her head had rested just hours before. Her shoes were gone. The coat she always hung on the back of the chair was missing too. No note on the counter. No goodbye. No explanation. Just gone. For a moment, I didn't move. I just stood in the doorway staring at the space where she used to be, trying to make sense of the emptiness. I hadn't heard her leave, hadn't felt any shift in the house during the night, but somehow I knew this wasn't a temporary absence. This wasn't a coffee run or a desperate errand to regain some shred of dignity. This was an exit. Quiet, final, unresolved. And maybe, deep down, I'd always known it would end this way. No confrontation, no screaming match, no dramatic collapse. Just one more piece of her slipping away like smoke. But she did leave something behind. It took me a few hours to find it, tucked inside the old photo album she'd unearthed just days earlier, folded neatly and wedged between two pages as if it had been waiting there for me all along. A letter, handwritten in the same careful cursive she used to write birthday cards and holiday notes, except this time there was nothing cheerful about the contents. The paper smelled faintly of her perfume, a sickly sweet scent that clung to my fingers as I unfolded the pages and began to read. It wasn't an apology, not fully. It started that way, with soft language and remorseful phrases, but as the letter went on, the tone shifted into something sharper, more defensive, like she couldn't decide if she was seeking forgiveness or trying to rewrite history in her favor. She said she was sorry for how things had gone, for how she'd handled the estate, for the choices she made that hurt me. But then came the twist, the part that made my stomach clench and my hands curl tight around the paper. She said she was owed that money. She said I had no idea what my parents were really like, no idea what debts they left behind, what promises they'd made, what secrets they kept hidden even from me. She said they weren't saints, that they had failed her long before they died, and that taking the inheritance was never about greed. It was about balance, about evening the scales in a life where she'd always played second to their perfect little family. She said I was just a child then, too blind to see that sometimes bloodlines carry shadows we never see until it's too late. I read those words over and over again, unsure whether they were lies meant to twist the knife one last time or truths that had been buried beneath years of resentment and silence. A part of me wanted to tear the letter to shreds the second I finished reading. Another part of me wanted to believe there was something honest buried in that mess of blame and bitterness. But mostly, I just felt tired. Bone-deep tired. The kind that no amount of closure could ever fix. Later that day, I drove to the cemetery. The wind was sharp and cold, the kind that cuts through your coat and makes your eyes water before you even reach the gates. I stood in front of my parents' graves, the granite headstones worn slightly from time and weather, and I tried to feel something that resembled clarity. But all I felt was the weight of everything left unsaid, all the questions I'd never get answers to, all the versions of the truth tangled between what Karen claimed and what I had always believed. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stood there for a while, the letter crumpled in my coat pocket, my breath fogging in the air, And I wondered, had I spent all these years chasing revenge against the wrong villain? Had I built my life around a lie? Or had I simply become a different kind of liar myself, one who dressed up vengeance in the language of justice and called it healing? When I got home, I didn't hesitate. I lit a match, dropped it into the fireplace, and watched the letter curl into ash without flinching. The photo album followed. Not out of anger, not out of pain, but because I finally understood that some legacies aren't worth preserving, some stories are better left untold, and some endings don't need to be tidy or fair, just final. I didn't tell anyone she'd left. I didn't try to find her. Maybe she found another place to start over. Maybe she's still out there, telling some twisted version of the story to anyone who'll listen, painting herself as the misunderstood victim of a cruel niece with no heart. I don't care, because I didn't do it for closure. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it to prove that I could survive. And maybe that's the cruelest kind of justice of all. Sometimes revenge feels like justice. Other times, it just feels like silence. I don't know which one this was, but I know she'll never forget how it ended.